And before I introduce Tarek Fatah, some of you received flyers. So on Monday, April the 28th and Tuesday the 29th, we're having two final talks of the academic year, and they should be good. We have David Hirsch, who's a professor from Goldsmiths College, and he'll be speaking about sort of the academic environment, the atmosphere in the United Kingdom, and issues of the teachers' union and aspects of anti-Semitism. And then we have Gunther Kelly. That's not his picture, by the way. He's a younger scholar, and he just did a major study. He was at the Technical University in Berlin. He's now a fellow at Tel Aviv University, but his home university is the Technical University of Berlin, so this is actually incorrect information. I'm sorry about that. And he did a very important study looking at Muslim youth in Europe and their perceptions of Jews and anti-Semitism. And it's a very important study, and he'll be speaking about that. Today we are in for a treat. It's a great honor to be able to introduce you to Tarek Fatah. Mr. Fatah is a well-known author and columnist in Canada and internationally. He has a regular column in the Toronto Sun, and he hosts a weekly Sunday afternoon talk show, which is very popular, on Toronto's CFRB radio station. He's a well-published author. He's written many books, including Chasing a Mirage, The Tragic Illusion of the Islamic State, which was a runners-up for the prestigious Donor Prize in 2008. And while his second book, which was when I first came across Tarek Fatah's writing, is The Jew Is Not My Enemy, which won the Helen and Stan Vine Award in 2010 for literature. And that, to me, was a refreshingly honest, well-thought-out, analytical book on how Pakistani society is changing and sort of the emergence, if you will, of contemporary anti-Semitism. It was a very important book. Tarek Fatah was born in Pakistan in 1949. He was a student leader from the left during the turbulent 1960s and 70s, and he was imprisoned twice by successive military dictators in Pakistan. In 1977, he was charged with sedition, yet by another military regime. There was a series of military regime changes in Pakistan, and he was actually barred from being a journalist within the country. After a 10-year stint in Saudi Arabia as an advertising executive, Tarek Fatah and his family migrated to Canada in 1987, where he's been active in the country's politics and within journalism since his arrival. In the aftermath of 9/11, Tarek Fatah founded the Muslim Canadian Congress, that has led the fight against radical Islam or Islamism. When people refer to Islamism who've attended our events, we are not speaking about Islam or Muslims, but a very specific reactionary form of a social movement, which is taking hold in many societies and in many institutions throughout the world. And he also did a lot of work exposing the Muslim Brotherhood's ideology and its politics in the West, including North America. So it's really a privilege and a great honor that Tarek Fatah flew all the way from Toronto to be with us this evening. So welcome.
Thank you very much for your kind words, Charles. I very rarely speak from prepared notes, and I did prepare one, so if I tend to digress, do excuse me. 4 years ago, was it, I think 5, when I submitted a proposal to my publisher of writing a book on Muslim anti-Semitism. Somewhere very deep inside me, I was hoping that the proposal would be rejected. And one of the reasons was there was a latent feeling that I was touching on a subject that didn't need to be touched. That it would not just annoy people who practice anti-Semitism in the Muslim world, and you know, when my people get annoyed, they really get annoyed. But it would also upset a lot of the standing structures of fight on anti-Semitism, which is within the Jewish community, a set of standard processes and procedures that within Jewish organizations, that if you rattle too much, they too get disturbed. It's almost as if one was undermining their authority in this area. But unfortunately, the book was, proposal was accepted, and I had to then, start researching. I think there's an echo here, which almost sounds as if he's listening up there. Okay. Yeah. Okay. I could do that without the microphone. Anyway, so if you need to understand the contemporary Jewish ignorance about anti-Semitism, I would suggest that in the next week follow the elections in Quebec, where the established Jewish organizations are firmly allied with some of the most hostile anti-Semites, and I don't use that word, Jew haters is a better word to describe these people, oblivious of the fact that their partners in their so-called interfaith peace dialogue are the real force of evil and the haters of the state of Israel and Jews in general, but because they are socially conservative in their alliance over circumcision and how cattle are slaughtered, there is a bizarre alliance between these two. So as long as the most hateful elements in Muslim society are allied with the rabbis and the leaders of the liberal Jewish organizations, they get these free trips to Israel every 3-4 months taken around, but you rarely ever see the Jewish community, say, talking to comedians or architects who are Muslim, or anyone else who's not ugly enough to be considered and not an authentic Muslim. So you have to fit into a certain profile of yards of cloth and lots of facial hair for the official Jewish leadership to accept that you are representative of the Muslim, and therefore, in order to have peace and brotherhood, you do this dialogue together. So support of Sharia primarily came from Jewish organizations in Canada. And in this week's election in Quebec, the single biggest North American political force fighting Islamism is being attacked by even the ADL. Just yesterday, they issued a statement saying that the Parti Québécois is anti-Semitic because one of the members of parliament said something about the kosher tax or something like that. But they dare not ever raise their voice against all those born in Canada, born in Quebec, born in America, Jew haters who speak fluent English, but blue mascara, red lipstick, and stilettos always gives you away as a moderate Muslim. So you never can figure out, he doesn't sound or she doesn't sound like an anti-Semite. Why? It's a brown-skinned person talking in fluent English. Couldn't be. Has to be moderate, you see. We walked around with Occupy Wall Street, so they have to be postmodernist. And in doing that, anti-Semitism's real force is hidden from the very victims. And in my research, I found that most of the Jewish community still is stuck in viewing anti-Semitism the way it was in the 20s or the 30s or the 40s and the 50s, a European construct, and has not yet graduated to understand that anti-Semitism's central fulcrum has shifted from Berlin to Baghdad. It is beyond their comprehension. Now, Jews may be a people of the Levant and the Middle East, but unfortunately they are so westernized and so integrated into European and American societies that they have lost any connection in the understanding of what it is to say, 1,000 times something. Of course, you could say it's 942 times greeting to you. Those are beyond our comprehension. And when I say our comprehension, it is those who are fighting this evil, hate-filled agenda, which is so easy to pursue because there are just not enough Jews to protest. You could be a hateful of Jews in China. You would not run into a Jew in 3 generations, right? So the primary source of Jew hatred today is Pakistan, where there are no Jews. So most people who kill Jews or want to kill Jews or slit the throat of Daniel Pearl have never met a Jew in their life till they kill him or her. In doing my research, then I'll just share with you some of the things that blew me away. I came across the prayers of a 10-year-old boy who told a TV audience of his adoring Islamic teacher that a prayer that I am sure no God in his right mind would ever pay attention to. But this boy and his Islamic teacher do believe that the guy up there has a special channel for hate. And instead of being embarrassed by hate, most people who hate Jews, first of all, if they're smart enough, they camouflage it as anti-Israel. Or they would say, we are not against Israel, but we are against Israel's expansionist policies. And then when you ask them, well, what about Pakistan occupying Balochistan for 65 years, Morocco occupying Western Sahara since 1974, Turkey occupying Kurdistan for 85 years, Indonesia occupying West Papua since 46. There's a gap and a silence in it, almost says, was there a Jew involved in that occupation or not? If not, why should we be concerned? Because it doesn't work for us that we would have to object to a principle of expansionism where 100,000 Arab children will be slaughtered by fellow Arabs in Syria. But since there are no Jews involved in it, there are no flotillas going to Damascus, right? And so this 10-year-old boy, I will repeat his prayer. He says, "O Allah, completely destroy and shatter the Jews. O Allah, torment them with a disease that has no cure or remedy. Send a thunderbolt down upon them from heaven. O Allah, torment them with every kind of torment. O Allah, send upon them flocks of swallows that will pelt them with stones of baked clay and turn them into straw that has been eaten. O Allah, turn their women into widows. Allah, turn their children into orphans. O Allah, bless the efforts of the Mujahideen. O Allah, bring victory upon us soon. Amen." Why your liberal leadership in your community is so focused on the KKK and the neo-Nazis, the war zone has shifted elsewhere. It's like trying to land troops on the French Atlantic coast after Berlin had fallen. It'd take a pretty dumb army general to recruit troops to liberate France when France was already liberated. The focus of anti-Semitism has shifted dramatically from Europe to Islamdom. Now, I'm not denying that there is a latent presence of that anti-Semitism that mixes up with Jew hatred of the Middle East, and that is reflected in the alliance between the Islamists and the left wing, those who still believe in the fine order in which North Korea and Cuba were constructed, those who still believe that the Soviet model was one that needed to be adored, and having lost all that, have now clung on to anti-Americanism by latching on to the Islamist hatred of America, within America, by American Muslim organizations. And in doing so, are strengthening the very forces that they should be fighting. That's the big tragedy that is taking place. And during the research of my book, I wondered, is this, and I didn't just wonder, I firmly believed, that is it Israel's presence in the West Bank that is an impetus to Arab hatred of the Jew? And as a strong supporter of the Palestinian cause, since I was 15 years old, I researched this with a fair degree of intensity but objectivity. And I left with a conclusion that sort of cracked my own view of the world, which was that even if there was no Israel, the hatred of the Jew in present times would still continue. Because most of the people who are imbibed in this hatred of the Jew are not at all concerned with the welfare of the Palestinian. It is their representation of what the United States of America and Western civilization represents. And in their state of mind, it is the Jew that epitomizes all that is vulgar about gender equality, about secularism, about the fact that you can deny the existence of God even while being a Jew and an Israeli citizen, or that you could be a Karl Marx, or you could be the most right-wing economist. And all those aspects of Western civilization can easily be attacked and undermined if the target is clear. And that is why Israel and the Jews are attacked, not because they are present in West Bank, or at that time even in Western Gaza, in the Gaza Strip, but because it is the easiest, most target in their contempt for Western civilization, whether it is Galileo or Voltaire or Rousseau. By the way, today's decree from Saudi Arabia that all atheists will be considered as terrorists. I hope you read that. The good news is that Cameron finally has come around to investigating the activities of the Muslim Brotherhood in England, and Canada's immigration minister has announced that Pakistan is a state sponsor of terrorism. Now, of these three news, I don't know which one is the April Fool's joke. I wish none of them are. The first one is, but it shows that people are considering. But coming back to the issue of Israel's factor and triggering Jewish hatred, I do feel it provides oxygen to Jew hatred, but I do not feel that if Israel didn't exist, that Jew hatred would disappear. And I'll give you a quote exactly from a leading Egyptian cleric who on January 17, 2009 said this on television. So quite instructive. He says, and I quote, "If the Jews left Palestine to us, would we start loving them? Of course not. We will never love them. Absolutely not. They are enemies not because they occupied Palestine. They would have been our enemies even if they did not occupy Palestine. You must believe we will fight, defeat, and annihilate them until not a single Jew remains on the face of earth And the cleric tells the audience, it is not me who says so. This is what Prophet Muhammad said. And then he quotes the Prophet. Judgment day will not come until you fight the Jews and kill them. The Jews will hide behind stones and trees, and the stones and trees will call, O Muslim, this is the stones saying, O Muslim, O servant of Allah, there is a Jew behind me. Come, kill him. As for you Jews, the curse of Allah upon you, the curse of Allah upon you, whose ancestors were apes and pigs. You Jews, this is not Prophet Muhammad's quote, this is the cleric now saying, the curse of Allah upon you, whose ancestors were apes and pigs. You Jews have sown hatred in our hearts, and we have bequeathed it to our children and grandchildren. You will not survive as long as a single one of us remains. Now, if you're writing a book and your primary research runs into this, there's a natural impetus for anyone who is secular and is trying to be fair to say, well, maybe this is on the outer fringe. Maybe these are the nut bars of Louis Farrakhan spread all over. But that's not the case. I went to Jerusalem, and it's a very funny place. If you're white and you're Muslim, no one asks you if you're a Muslim. If you're my color, the Copts, Palestinian Copts, take you aside and ask you to read the Shahada, the oath of Islam, to determine how did you, dark-skinned little fella, who should be right down there, come to this mosque to pray amongst us. The racism you feel in one of the holiest places of Islam is so profound that shakes your very belief system. And I refused. And I said to him, perhaps you should repeat it, but in my language, which is Punjabi. Because I refuse to speak in your language, because I'm a Muslim. And it took about 15 minutes to be resolved, because I lived in Saudi Arabia, I can speak and understand Arabic, till another one said, let him go, he's just a Hindi Rafiq, a piece of crap, the N-word in their point of view, let him pray, I met people over there, went there 3 days in a row, and I asked a lawyer over there if he recognized that this was the Temple of David. And he said, no, that is somewhere else. And if you believe this is the Temple of David, do you also believe that Neil Armstrong landed on the moon? And I realized the chasm is so wide. In what genuine, well-meaning people in my part of the world have been told to link with Western civilization. It leaves you as a Muslim in absolute shock, and with the view that there is no redemption for my people. It's, what was it, Tennyson who said, miles to go?
Frost.
Yeah, frost. Just not anything on the horizon. The guys tried to convince me that this was a set created in Hollywood. However, when I shared this with Karen Mock, a leading Jewish human rights activist from Canada, who was in Amman, and we were chatting about Jordan's recognition of Israel as a Jewish state, I said, that is a very far-fetched idea. Can you ask them if they recognize the temple as a Jewish temple? If they are not recognizing a Jewish temple, what the hell are you trying to get them to recognize you as a Jewish state? What paradigms has the Jewish leadership adopted What sort of targets have you set for yourself in which there is predetermined failure? Instead of the allies that you look for the worst of people, because you study the anti-Semitist movement written by Europeans who never met an Indian in their entire life. Because anti-Semitism in Poland was equally hateful of Arabs as well as Jews. In fact, it's funny that Poland, the government today, is the most pro-Israel, and the people, I've been there, are really hostile to Jews, and I'm not kidding. It is phenomenal. And the reasoning is that, well, you know, the Jews at least, it's okay, we're part of NATO, so we've got to deal with the Americans. But them pesky Arabs, man, they are the real dirty Semites. And this confounds the leadership of the Jewish community in Warsaw. Well, how is the government pro-Israel and the people anti-Jew? But it works. And then you run into Polish Muslims who are Tatars, who say, who are you who brought this disgrace to Islam by coming to our country? They cannot identify with the Arabs. So the problem that we face is so deep, so complex, and so self-defeating in how we're approaching it, that we are enhancing the power of our enemy. Because if there is the possibility of fighting Jew hatred by Muslims, it will have to come by empowering Muslims who stood by the Jews in the darkest hour throughout Europe. I'm not talking of some Andalusian story from the 15th century with the Jews and all happily lived out. I'm talking of King Zog of Albania in 1936, who gave away Albanian passports to every Jew that he could meet in Berlin while Kristallnacht was going on. To get out, well, that was the upper class. He moved in nobility. He's a Muslim. I can give you instances. I've dedicated my book to this woman who's known in the West as Nora Baker. Nora Baker was shot dead, just a few months before the end of the war. She was a British spy working with the French resistance. And she was dark-skinned, so the Nazis thought she was Creole. And while they executed 4 other British and French resistance fighters, they tortured her because she wouldn't tell them who she was. And her last words were liberty. And she wouldn't tell who she was. And she was a Muslim princess from South India. And her name was not Nora Baker, her name was Prince Nur Sultan. She fought for the Jews. You go to Majdanek, you go to the death camps, you see over there the Kurds, the Turks, the Uzbeks. Tens of thousands of Muslims died fighting alongside and for the saving of the Jews. Some in the Red Army, some volunteers, some who fought against the Palestinian Mufti who recruited the Balkan SS. There was a mosque right in the middle of Paris, built given as a gift to the Kabyle Moroccan builders of the French underground network, the subway station. And that was a prime route of the escape of Jewish boys in barrels that were concealed as in the barges that took wine down further south. And they were circumcised boys, so they were designated as Muslim by the Imam. Hundreds of Jewish kids were saved. In Bosnia, where the ancient artifacts were saved by Muslim families, which the Nazis wanted to destroy. Those are the people, some of them are recognized in Israel as, there's a term for them, written down here, but
Righteous of the nations. Righteous
yes,
of the nations.
yes. Now, where are these people? They're all around you. But they're just not ugly enough to be considered authentic Muslims. Who is supporting our fight in Canada against anti-Semitism? No one. The Jewish groups want to be seen with women with lots of cloth all over them because it makes them look diversity, outreach. We are not racist, we are not anti-Muslim. When Jew hatred is planted by the Muslim Brotherhood, why is the Jewish community reluctant to take on the Muslim Brotherhood and Islamism as a fascist ideology? There's a fear. And the cowardice of the left in America is carefully concealed as an effort to do outreach. No. They are complicit and history will judge them for having blood on their hands. You remember the bombs that were targeted at Chicago synagogues. That was a few years ago. Do you know who busted that conspiracy? It was a Saudi man in Saudi intelligence who on his own alerted his colleagues in the States that this is what my people are about to do. Many people were saved by this guy. He was a Muslim, driven by a concept of humanity. And the only way this can be done is secularism. Not interfaith nonsense of Somalis and samosas, of people getting together and saying, oh, you know, we have circumcision and food in common, let's... This alliance of circumcision is a nightmare for the rest of us. It's frightful to look around and say that the Islamists have better access to ADL than I could ever have. I don't even know anyone in ADL. That a Saudi influenced, this is the crux of what's going to happen on April 7th. A government in North America will for the first time be led by a man, school trained in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and his name is Philippe Couillard, if I'm pronouncing it right. He's the leader of the Liberal Party of Quebec. He's supported by all the Jewish organizations that can muster themselves in Canada. And he is linked with Prince Bandar bin Sultan. 10 years in Saudi Arabia, on the board of Saudi government Ministry of Health Issues, who has brought 800 Saudi undertrained doctors in Quebec. And no one knows that this is happening. No one, even Charles didn't know that. And he's from Montreal. Why should I know it and them? Whose responsibility it is in this fight against Jew hatred that a Saudi-trained person would be able to depict his opponents as anti-Semitic and get the ADL in America to issue a statement against them? Your grandchildren are going to judge this leadership as being the worst possible in all of America's Jewish history. Because whether it is George Bush Jr. or Barack Obama, both have indicated that they have sold their souls to petrodollars. I have never seen even the chauffeur of King Abdullah kiss the hand of the king the way your president did. And for that alone, he should have been impeached. I'm serious. I'm a Barack Obama supporter. I was so ecstatic when he won. But when I realized that his chief of staff, your IDF former guy, was now the mayor of Chicago, had instructed every Muslim friend of Barack Obama from his school days not to ever talk about their friendship, an alarm bell went off in my head. A secure person wouldn't have a problem who he met as a teenager or that he lived in Pakistan for a while. Why are you trying to hide these facts? Because you are promoting the Muslim Brotherhood right across the Muslim world when the rest of us are fighting it. And you bring Huma Abedin as the Deputy Chief of Staff to the Secretary of State for a woman who was schooled in Saudi Arabia for 18 years. For heaven's sake, even a piece of furniture turns Islamist if you leave it in Saudi Arabia. You know, everything turns into crap over there. It's the most medieval, apartheid, racist, bigoted, hateful society that God could have created. And I'm sure he did it for the rest of the world to say, there is evil, never ever follow it. Instead, every American president has said, evil? That means lots of money. How else do you explain that the same country where JFK said in 61 or 62 that our wars will not be fought by tanks and armies, there will be no guerrillas by night. This is a war of ideas. And he implored the journalists of the 60s to watch how they contributed. JFK, yes, about communism. Do you think it has changed? Do you think Huma Abedin has a leg to stand on? Do you think she will ever answer the question, what do you think about Saudi Arabia, Mrs. Huma Abedin, now that your husband has been reduced to crap because of you? Can you imagine Hillary Clinton as a president to all the Democrat Jews that live in this country and fight, boast of civil rights? That a Saudi-trained woman will be the chief of staff of the next president of the United States, whose father set up the Mu'tamar Alam Islami, the World Muslim League in Saudi Arabia, whose mother is the rector of a university producing radical female Islamists in Riyadh, and the woman herself was assistant editor of her father's magazine. It's all there for you to read. And folks, it's in English, not Swahili. But it's difficult reading because it goes against your chain of thought. KKK bad, Nazi bad, Arabs quaint, put them in a circus, let's have a dance. Indians fly on carpets. That's left-wing racism that has swept into your mind, and so you do not take it seriously when Pakistan has 200 nukes pointed west and Iran has none, but Iran is the enemy but Pakistan is not. Somebody screwed up big time in understanding the security needs of Israel or the Jews or the rest of Western civilization. When Pakistan's 200 nukes with ranges of 6,000 miles are simply shrugged off and another $1 billion a year is given to them, but Iran that doesn't even have a slingshot made out of radiation material is the big bad boy. Think about it, the role of Iranian Jewish diaspora in California and the presence in Israel, and then determine where the narrative is taking you. We are being left defenseless. Not a single Israeli paper has ever been published on Pakistan's nuclear program. The only nukes that are pointed at Israel. There is no other nuclear power. Why does Pakistan need nukes and delivery systems with 3,000 and 6,000 kilometers? Just take a radius, and they're based at the mouth of the Straits of Hormuz in Gwadar, where the Chinese nuclear subs can sit in a pen, and the leadership is attacking the Parti Québécois. Folks, I'll end over here. I don't want to depress you. I can see that I have done a great job at that. But for heaven's sake, you go back and talk to your colleagues and say, ask a simple question. At what stage will a reporter ask Huma Abedin, what do you think of Saudi Arabia? Thank you very much.
So it's not the most provocative thing you had to say, but I'm confused by what you did say about Huma Abedin.
Yes.
You said that her husband got into trouble because of her. And she hasn't said anything about Saudi Arabia. But why would one ask Huma Abedin rather than a lot of other people?
Because she's chief of staff of the Secretary of State. If Kissinger's chief of staff was the son of a Nazi, would you have allowed that? Her father is the founder of the Mu'tamar Alam-e-Islami, which translates to the World Muslim League, which is the international arm of the Muslim Brotherhood funded by the Saudis. Died. Now, second point, mother and father both come to the United States of America. If a son is born, most Muslim parents are okay. He's going to date a few girls over here, he's a nice guy. When a girl is born and the parents take her back, I can bet you that family is hardcore anti-West. That's what they did. Huma is born, they take her straight to Saudi Arabia. Not to Pakistan, not to India where they were from. I was there all 10 years when this family was there. They were known as having, tight links with the Saudis. Look at some of the people associated with the father. Let her comment on what happened, and why not? We ask all sorts of questions with everyone. Hillary should be asked this question.
How do they deal with her marrying a Jew?
He converted to Islam. It doesn't take much for a Jew. You come prepared. You don't even have to go anywhere.
Wiener converted to Islam?
Of course he did. How else would any cleric arrange a marriage? How does it work? Like, is this rocket science? I'm not talking about rescuing Apollo 13. I'm just telling you, how do Muslim women marry non-Muslim men? My daughter did so. The guy goes in there, abracadabra. No, not necessarily, but boom! Becoming Muslim is very easy. It is one of the most fascinating faiths on earth. All you got to say is there's a God and Muhammad is prophet. You don't even have to know the Quran. Most of Muhammad's followers became Muslim before the Quran was revealed, so Quran is not essential even to Islam. Dare I say, but I could validate that. So you go there, you ask a number of people. She's not the only Muslim who's married a non-Muslim. Let's have a survey, starting with many of my nieces. So, attacking KKK and neo-Nazis is going to make you feel good. Dealing with the real SOBs is the tough job that requires you to be in the uncomfortable lane, to drive on paths that are not metal roads. That's a bumpy traffic in a 1952 Chevy truck. Sorry, yes.
I was going to ask you, first of all, you touched on something.
Would you speak up so the rest of us can hear what you say?
I was going to say, first of all, you touch on something which I think is important for people to understand, that people can convert. It's not like a Jew could become a Nazi,
Yeah.
a Jew could become a Muslim.
Yeah.
So it's not a racial issue. It's a
Yeah, you'd still be a Jew, but you'd be a Muslim Jew.
You'd be a Muslim Jew, yeah, but
Yeah.
it's a racial, it's not a racial issue, it's a religious issue. So the point that it's a religious issue, can you give us some background on how that drove anti-Semitism, and is there, for lack of a better term, like a Vatican II effort on your part to try to get a more moderate view?
Look, the essence of Islamic literature, the opening of the Quran, is a very beautiful verse when read. It's Surah Fatah, as we say. It's really good to read it. If you look at the translations or the interpretations, smack in there are the people who went astray, and in brackets the Jews, and the people who are untrustworthy or something, the Christians. It's written there. That's how you kickstart your world into Islam. Now, I'm sure there must be other texts who say nasty things about other people, but those people do not exist anymore. So if somebody said something about the Hittites in, say, the Indian Vedas, there are not a whole lot of million Hittites saying, I'm offended, no cartoons about me. No, they don't. The only people who are abusing other people as a religious text are my people. I hate to admit it, but there's no reference in the Jews about Muslims because they didn't exist, right? So you got away scot-free, you're talking, that's the nature of the beast in a chronological survey. Now, if somebody is a Muslim nationalist, that means he could have bacon and drink whiskey and never go to the mosque, but he could be a Muslim nationalist. That's the Tariq Ali types. You don't even believe in God. You don't even believe Muhammad existed or horses can fly. Yet you're a Muslim nationalist. What does it mean? You're imbibed in the notion that life actually begins after you die. You've got to understand this. There's not a single believing Muslim, if he's a believing Muslim, and if there are over here, correct me, who doesn't believe that life begins after death. So if that's your fundamental belief, now I have to die to live. That's why there is no problem recruiting suicide bombers. You're dealing with a death cult employed by a fascist movement that's invoking the word of God. And what are you doing in return? Send in the bombers. You're bombing, killing mosquitoes. I'm begging you to drain the swamps. The easier part is draining the swamp, but there's no money to be made. It's not that you're going to give out a contract to McDonnell Douglas and, this corporation and that corporation. But when you have to kill mosquitoes, boy, each mosquito costs you about $1 million that you borrow from China to kill that damn mosquito. And then it comes up again. And then you hug King Abdullah, kiss his hand. And he says, Iran, bad boy, easy word to pronounce, 4 letters. Me, complicated, Saudi Arabia, I don't know. It's really dumb that the President of the United States goes to a country whose king's daughters are pleading to him, help save us because we've been in prison for 40 years. 15?
13.
Sorry? 13, sorry, 13 years, my apology. She's 40 years old, sorry, the princess. I'm glad someone's giving up with the princesses. How can a president go there and not talk about that? And then leave and the next day atheists are terrorists is the decree that comes out. There's no shame. There's not even there'd be more pain on his face if the Red Sox lost, I look at it and I say, what sort of people are these? Then I remember that till 1941, the Americans didn't want to join the war. There's money to be made. The head of Krupp's Corporation, KRUPPS, was speaking to Congress at a time when Britain was being bombed and Manchuria was occupied and Mussolini had taken over Ethiopia, and Haile Selassie was begging the Americans. But they said, no, money's to be. What about those jays? What about the, giants and all sorts of gladiators that you pay billions to perform, and that stops everything. Can you imagine on the Oscars, CNN stopped for 18 hours while something else was going on in the Malaysian thing? They said, 18 hours we will not talk of those 2 arcs or this triangle over here. You billboard down journalism to the level where Walter Cronkite will never be born in this country again. Never. I cannot imagine when newscasters, I come from broadcasting, these newscasters now all read from teleprompters. Do you know how they are directed to make their faces? The writers make smiling faces or sad faces and paragraphs, and the faces change with that. Look at CNN and Fox and tell me if I'm wrong. Oh, the loved ones. I hate the word loved one. In 2 or 4 weeks, the loved ones of the Malaysian, the loved ones, the loved ones. It's written, and then they have a teary-eyed look, then they smile, then they have a teary-eyed look. This is Walter Cronkite's children. Lord have mercy on this country. You got Bush, then you get Obama, And now what do you have, Hillary Clinton? I bet you all of you should migrate to Canada. Honest to God, at least we've got leaders that have some spine.
Yeah.
Harper.
That, huh?
I'm serious. I'm a left-wing NDP, but I'd vote for him. Sorry, yes.
I've often wondered about Abadi.
Yes.
My personal theory was that she was allowed to marry Wiener because, as a method of infiltration. And can you authenticate the fact that he converted to Islam?
He wouldn't even know, ma'am.
Pardon?
He wouldn't even know he converted.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah, it's my son-in-law. You asked him, he said, what? Did I convert? It's the abracadabra and you're done.
But do you think that it's part of the infiltration?
Absolutely, I have no doubt about it.
Okay.
I have absolutely no doubt that every fluent English-speaking American is more dangerous than the ones who have a deep Arabic or Indian accent when they come here. If the guy has an accent, chances are he loves America. If his kid is fluent in English, chances are you're in trouble.
Have you had threats against you?
Oh, don't worry. I'm a cancer survivor, so I don't worry about threats anymore. If he couldn't do it, these guys can't either. Someone had a hand at the back and I missed them. Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I was actually wanted to, when you said about, every Muslim believes that life begins after death. I'm Muslim.
Yes.
And, all the Muslims I know, I don't think they believe in that.
Of course they do.
I disagree with that.
No,
get your
that is-
opinion, But, for Muslims it said that, this world is a trial.
Yes.
Or a playground.
Right.
It's where it's transitionary, right? But that doesn't, qualify for Muslims to believe that this world, the life begins after you're dead.
But that's what the Quran says, eternal life begins.
Eternal life begins.
But that's what life is. I mean, what is this?
So-
Like, you appear for a GMAT and then you get into Wharton Business School. The GMAT is not the
So
MBA.
does that mean, until you don't qualify the GMAT exam, you're not living? Your life starts before you hit the GMAT
I tell you,
exam.
if you've done GMAT, you're not living. No, but listen, the fact remains that if you are not aware of Muslim edicts and Sharia, chances are you're a happy guy. But if you're schooled in Islam, any madrasa, I can tell you, life begins after death. And here, it's inconvenient truth, but all the pleasures that we miss, the bars, and the dancing girls, and the strip models, and, the booze, the girlfriends that we were never allowed to date by our parents, don't behave like an American. We brought you to America to behave like the Brazilians. Oh, but they have a better party. So, no, back to Pakistan I'll send you. You've heard that, I've heard that, right? So the dating begins in paradise.
No, that's an opinion the extremists have. If for
Brother.
example, somebody from Al Qaeda would be sitting here, he would be nodding his head away.
No, that's the point.
But if you ask a rational Muslim,
Which
I
rational?
pray 5 times a day, then
I know.
But I haven't had a problem meeting girls. I personally by choice have refrained from alcohol. But we need to consider these things as
I understand.
very important because they convey a different message.
Here's the point. We can be defensive, or we have a choice of accepting the trauma we are in and take corrective measures. If we don't,
Exactly, this is the
okay, here's the point. But just between you and me, if you are being defensive about the facts that you and I both know, about sexuality, about pleasure, about joy, about happiness, the inability of a young man to ever repeat what the Prophet did is so hypocritical. His first act was, as a 25-year-old young man, to marry a twice divorced Christian woman who was 45. You show me one American dude over here who's going in the MSA saying, I'm looking for a twice divorced woman, I'm following the Prophet. Not one of them, not none. So let's keep the reality in focus that what's happening with Muslims is a tragedy for them. I have to move on. So, go ahead.
I'm bothered by your presentation.
Yes.
Because I feel that the three things which would be best for Jews in this world are moderate leadership in Israel, moderate leadership here, and by that I mean the center-left, the Democratic Party, and moderate Islam. I mean, those are the three things that I think would be best for Jews in this world. And you came here, and the talk is about anti-Semitism, a better future for Jews, and yet, in my mind, you're vilifying the three things which would, or the two, you mentioned two of them,
Yeah.
which would be best for Jews in this world. I mean, the notion of
Sure.
conspiratorial stuff with Obama and linkages to his Muslim background and Hillary Clinton and her chief of staff,
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
and moderate Islam. I mean, these things are things that, in my view, we should be rooting for.
It's
And so I'm dismayed to hear them, in my view,
Sure.
somewhat vilified.
sure. Just a second. I agree from your point of view. That's conventional wisdom. That's what it is, and it's not working.
And,
If it-
and it what? And it's not working?
It's conventional wisdom. It's not working for you, right? You have seen a time from FDR's right down to now where your legitimacy as a people or Israel as a country is less now than it ever was. And you've tried to practice exactly what I have been criticizing. What moderate Muslim leadership do you know of in the United States of America? Name me one.
Well, Islam has no foundation here. I mean, Islam has no meaningful foundation on whether it be radical Islam or moderate
Here?
Islam. Not much.
Are you kidding me? The Muslim Brotherhood operates over here.
It's overstated.
How is it overstated? How do you know that?
I think America is a very difficult place for Muslims to be, whether they're
Are you
radical
kidding
or
me? You
moderate.
think Fareed Zakaria is having a great problem in this country? Khalid Hosseini is a bestseller
Well-
for 3 years in a row? You think he was victimized? That is why his book is number one?
It's true. It's true. America is a good place in cosmopolitan areas for Muslims. That's true. That's true.
And where are the Muslims being persecuted, sir? With my name, Fatah, I'm not.
I mean, I simply spoke up because it's painful for me to hear.
I know. You should Buckley. They say Buckley's mixture is good because it tastes so bad. I hope you take it back and reflect on it, rather than take the route of the neo left right now that says that anyone who ever criticizes Islamism is a racist.
It needs to be criticized, but it definitely needs to be criticized, and so often I find myself making that case that we need to criticize radical Islam, but
It's not radical Islam, sir. You have a Muslim Brotherhood infiltration from 1991 over here.
that sounds like conspiracy talk.
Absolutely. It's not conspiracy. It's there. Every university has an MSA. What conspiracy are you talking about? What are the foundation documents of the Muslim Students Association in Harvard? You have more anti-Semitism today in Harvard, in Yale, in Stanford, in Berkeley than you ever had. And who are the people? They are Islamists hiding behind you, hiding behind the Democratic left to say, I am so left-wing, I'm with the Occupy Wall Street movement. No, sir. They are obsessed with their hate that men and women are equal. And you will never get it because you seem to have that white guilt feeling that says, how could I be against the people who are illiterate and poor and marginalized? And my question is, why can't we manufacture a bicycle in the entire world? Why? Because we believe in flying horses. And seriously believe in it. Sorry.
And if I may, you made a statement that it's a conspiracy. Given this is supposed to be a scholarly gathering, what do you base that on? Is that your impression, your personal opinion, or can you rely on?
Sure.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
I ask you a question.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Can you rely on any scholarly analysis that would claim what Mr. Fatah has been saying is just conspiracy and lies?
I suspect there's some truth to what he's saying.
No, okay.
But-
But there's a lot of books that have been written where this is borne out, including Mr. Fatah's book, which I don't think you've read because
You're right.
you would have maybe critiqued some of his factually based, footnoted, referenced sources. So to come here and say it's conspiracy, With all due respect, it's a seminar in a building in Harvard. All criticism is very welcome and encouraged, but do it with some knowledge. Thank you.
Sorry.
Okay. As someone who, as many people in this room have probably done as well.
Could you speak up so that everybody can hear what you say?
Yes, I'll try. As someone who, as many people in this room have probably experienced at a personal level, that is of anti-Semitism, I appreciate you bringing forward your viewpoints about how the political system has fallen short on helping address this issue. However, you're talking about within your culture that it's the moderate Muslim, whether practicing or not, that we have to be concerned about. I always feel that education is the best way to address it. Not that the Muslim Brotherhood is fostering all this anti-Semitism, hatred of Jews, of Western ideas, but what can be done to address how to combat this other than going after the political leaders, going after Hillary Clinton and her chief of staff, after going after Obama. I think it has to be done at a more of a grassroots level, like seminars like this, but also how do you talk to the people and educate what the real political atmosphere is about, that Jews aren't the enemies of the whole world, that the United States, while we are definitely consumers of most of the resources of the planet, I mean, those are the things that we have to address. Those are the things that need to address to change the world's culture.
I agree with you completely, but let me put the facts on the table. Where I come from, where I was born, Pakistan, and I relate to India more than Pakistan, or Arabia, where I lived for a decade, I never met an uneducated person who was anti-Semitic.
You never met
Never met an uneducated person who was anti-Jew. Every anti-Jewish person that I have met so far is highly educated. Now, which is not saying that education breeds hatred against Jews. What it suggests is that as long as the Egyptian farmer or the Pakistani peasant or the guy in Balochistan, in the mountains, is linked with his religion as a moral compass, where he tells that to his children, don't lie or don't steal, the path stays fine. And hence, till the Second World War, there is no indication of Jew hatred in a place like Pakistan. Karachi had a thriving Jewish community. Peshawar, of all the places, was a place where the Jews of Central Asia, after the communist interaction, were welcome. In Peshawar, the best neighborhoods were Jewish. And whether you were educated or illiterate or peasant, the Jew was considered the epitome of knowledge. So in 1956, the best-selling movie in Pakistan, 1962 was a movie called Yehudi Ki Ladki, the daughter of a Jew. As kids, I remember my sisters dressing up that way. It was more of a gladiator, Roman type story adapted from the West. But can you imagine today, after rise in education, an Arab or a Muslim country making a movie where the daughter of a Jew would be the heroine or the good person? It's not possible anymore. What is happening fundamentally to this is the 1973 war and the oil boom that enriched a very hostile anti-West culture of Saudi Arabia and the Gulf Arab states with enormous wealth. with which they bought places in universities, chairs at Georgetown College. Many of the staff members of the State Department are trained by chairs funded by Prince Talal. Even amongst the Arabs who used to come to India, by the way, 40s and 50s to study, I never, ever heard, even in 67, in the war, I met the first Palestinians in 67, I never heard somebody being anti-Jewish. I'm talking about the Popular Front guys, the Marxists. This phenomena is post-1973, and you have to study it back to the empowerment of Saudis to invest and buy. I urge you to read Robert Baer's article in The Atlantic and in the Wall Street Journal about Prince Bandar bin Sultan's recipe of how to control the West, and it says, we take care of defeated politicians.
Okay, but my point was that you can use the education to defeat some of these ideas.
I understand. Let me even come to that. You cannot match Saudi money. You cannot match it. You know how many madrasas there are in Bangladesh? 12,000. Each one is funded exclusively by Saudi Arabia. As long as you are willing, from George Bush to Barack Obama, to accept, even Grover Norquist embraces Saudi Arabia. Everyone, he's the guru of the right-wing conservatives. And he's completely in awe with the Saudis. The Iranians are far more, as a Sunni Muslim I'm saying, far more progressive in how they treat women and minorities than Saudi Arabia would be in 100 years. You need to question, how did we come to a conclusion that Iran is the problem and Saudi Arabia is a friend? Those are questions that I'm imploring you to ask.
But
Excuse me, we have a question here.
I think it's an exaggeration to say you've never met a poor anti-Semite in the Muslim world. I think of it more as anti-Semitism is, I'm sorry?
Uneducated.
Uneducated. I think it's more a top-down thing, that the educated and the intellectuals train their way down. And I think it goes, and I don't think it's just in the Islamic world. I think you can go all the way back to Martin Luther and his diatribe against the Jews.
Yes.
So I think that that's a little bit selective.
I understand. I agree with you. I may have phrased it incorrectly.
One other thing that I'm not sure, I hope my facts are correct, but I read recently that an Israeli soccer team preparing for the FIFA or these international matches was denied entry into Saudi Arabia to practice.
Yes.
And there was not a peep out of the State Department, anyone else at the International Soccer Association. And I would like to disagree with you about your focusing in so much in Saudi Arabia, but when I read that, my immediate reaction was, this is a country that we're sending the latest weaponry, airplanes to, and you don't hear a word from the administration, from the State Department, saying, let these kids go in and practice. And so that, to me, proves that you're absolutely correct. And sadly, I think that Saudi Arabia is, where it starts, the top-down approach. And I think
Let me make a prediction that Saudi Arabia will one day break up. It's not a country. Will break up because, just as a background, up to 1925, there were two countries in what is called Saudi Arabia: the Kingdom of Hijaz and the Sultanate of Najd. The Sultanate of Najd invaded a League of Nations member and captured and massacred thousands of Muslims in Hijaz and took over and made the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. That is just as a matter of fact. Not a single person ever asks for the Saudis to end their occupation of Mecca. Can you imagine the constant narration that Jerusalem is our first center. But Mecca, if it is occupied by, it's okay. And coming back to the notion of soccer players, we heard so much about Putin and his anti-gay Olympics and Sochi being a piece of crap. Have you ever heard a single word about how Qatar has already killed about 900 people so far in building their construction, Bangladeshis and Nepalese, where gays would be hanged and killed, but not a single gay lesbian community organization, nor civil liberties group has dared to say to boycott Qatar. Boycott Sochi, we all know about it. Boycott Qatar? Who wants to burn their boats? Who wants to say, oh, maybe I will network with them, and what if I run into someone who was on their payroll? What will I do? You show me one American saying boycott Qatar, and sir, I will then submit to you that there may be some truth in what you're telling me. But as long as not a single American is opposed to the football cup being played in a country that has a law against non-Muslims, that has a law against gays, that does not allow gender equality, and uses slave labor to build its stadiums, then we have a serious, there is something rotten in this kingdom. And I say academics have the luxury to analyze and do a paralysis of analysis. Fortunately, I'm not an academic. I come from the streets of politics. I have been to prison twice. I've been exiled. I cannot go to Pakistan. My life is under constant threat. So frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn what academics think, because they can think all they want. But what they've reduced this great country to today, that it has to kiss the hand of a Saudi king, I will not forgive him or the intellectuals who allowed that to happen. Sorry, you.
I go back to, you used a great term about draining the swamp, so I'd like to talk about that a little bit more. First of all, in my mind, there's two things we could do. One is energy independence, because it's energy at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
And the fuel that fuels our greatest enemies at the end of the day, right?
Yep.
Because the things they couldn't invent themselves, they can now buy from us.
Absolutely.
I think it was a great, I forget which leader it was, Lenin, who said that ultimately the fundamental flaw in capitalism is that the capitalists will sell us the rope to hang them with,
Yes.
right?
He said something else, what is to be done. That was a better book by Lenin.
So that was, I just want to touch on two things. That's one aspect. The other, I want to share with you, if you will allow me,
Yes.
something I discovered the other day, because it's part of the education. It's not a Jewish issue, it's an American history issue. I had read a couple months ago that Keith Ellison, who is the first Muslim
Yes.
congressman, when he took his oath of office, he asked specifically if he could be sworn in on the Thomas Jefferson Quran.
Yes.
I don't know if anybody had heard about that.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, yes.
We know.
So the Thomas Jefferson Quran. So it forced me to kind of read the background on all that and why Thomas Jefferson had an English version of the Quran. And the long and the short of it was, immediately after the Revolutionary War, we had a big debt. We got rid of our Navy. He was tasked to go to France as the ambassador to France to promote trade. And our boats, our merchant ships, a lot of Massachusetts merchant ships, were trying to do business in the Mediterranean, and they had to pass through the Straits of Gibraltar and hug the Barbary coast.
Mhm.
So they were being attacked by Islamic pirates called the Barbary pirates.
Hmm.
So he began negotiating with he was asked to negotiate with the ambassador of Morocco.
And the Bay of Tunisia,
Oh, the Bay-
yeah.
the Bay of
The
Tunisia.
Betsy.
What?
Yeah.
It was the Betsy.
That's right.
Yeah.
So he was confronted with him telling him, I mean, you probably know the story better than I, but it's an important story for people to understand. He was being told that you cannot pass through Islamic lands without paying as an infidel, Americans as an infidel, without paying us the Jesus tax. Therefore, we're going to continue to do that. So first he went around and asked his French counterparts and the Spanish counterparts what they do, and they said, we have a Navy, so we can protect our shipping. You don't have a Navy anymore. So he went back to Congress and tried to get Congress to reinstitute the Navy, and they said, no, pay the guys. Pay them whatever it takes. So every year, the payment kept going up. The hostage-taking continued. And by, I think it was 1799, when the whole US Congress had a budget of $7 million, we were paying 1.2 million of that to Barbary
It was,
pirates.
the figure was 25,000 a year.
But no,
And John Adams
kept
was,
asking.
it went up. But the reason for the Quran by Jefferson was John Adams asked him very specifically, why?
Right.
He said, because it is our duty, and it is in the it is our Quranic duty.
It's the Quran. So he had to,
So he had to buy the
he
Quran
had to buy the Quran in English in order to deal with it. But at the end of the day, but I want to give you a punchline to it
Yeah.
from an American. This is an American story. It's not a Jewish story. It's an American story. Okay. What happened after that is that the United States ultimately, as a result of Massachusetts merchants saying we can't get crews, we can't get ships, I can't get insurance. This is crazy. It's got to be cheaper to build a navy. We rebuilt the United States Navy and commissioned the first ship called the USS Constitution to fight Islamic terrorism. The first wars were between 1801 and 1805, not the War of 1812, that those boats saw action.
That's where
That's
we
why the
Canadians
United States
beat
Navy
you.
was created.
Sorry, go ahead, sir.
You spoke disparagingly about the Muslim notion of this world in contrast to an afterlife. It seems to me that notion is not exclusive to Islam.
Yes.
There's many medieval Jewish philosophers who also have this, and even in the 16th, 17th, even currently, the idea that our life here is just a preparation in some way for an afterlife. I don't know much about Christian theology, but I think that some elements of that exist there as well. Among the Buddhists as well, similar notions exist. So how can you contrast for us in some way how the Muslim notion that you, I think, correctly portrayed differs from the other?
No, it
And
doesn't.
also, just one little comment, like you comment about Qatar and how we were discriminated against the Israelis. We in the United States had an American press representative not being permitted to accompany Obama to Saudi Arabia because he was Jewish.
Yes,
Just
I
an
know.
aside, I'd like to ask,
Okay, the first question is significant. Let me explain it in as simpler a term as possible. Islam is Judaism planted on Arab pagan culture. Once you understand that, everything falls into place. Everything that the Jews believe, Muslims believe too. The difference is between Ishmael and Isaac, or where it happened. The point being that in the 16th or 17th century, before the Industrial Revolution, if people were mystified about the afterlife and took it pretty seriously, or believed in flying horses approaching the skies, or believed that a fire could speak or God could have a son, I can understand. Even today, if my grandmother or my mother or my sisters actually both believe in that, I don't have an issue with that. My issue comes when your politics is driven by that belief. I have absolutely no problem Hindus believing in chariots flying, or the measurement of time being from 1/16th of a microsecond, by the way. This is fascinating. The Hindu, Indian measurement of time is so breathtaking that I think most people from Judah, Islamic or Christian faith should study Hinduism as a matter of intellectual exercise. From 1/16th of a microsecond, there are known measures of time going up to 300 trillion years. That's the length of time in which the Indian astronomical and mathematical measurements go. They don't believe in an afterlife. They believe in resurrection, whether it is the Sikhs or Indian-based faiths are rooted, and the Buddhists don't even believe in God. It's an atheistic faith. And all of it is fine with me. The problem is when your politics is based on that notion, when your physics is based on that, when the head of Pakistan's Nuclear Energy Commission says that we can harness energy by capturing genies at a conference of nuclear scientists, then we have a serious problem that he is managing 200 nukes while believing that genies can be harnessed for energy. Or someone produces a water-based car in Pakistan, and the whole country observes a water car day till it find out it drives you into inaction. That superstition stopped with Voltaire and Rousseau hundreds of years ago, and they just start coming up in Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. How can you pass a law saying that atheists are terrorists? That's not an April Fool's joke, sir. It may be painful. What I'm saying might be disconcerting. But the least you can do is say, since 9/11, nothing that we did worked. Why is it? Let me share with you something that was distributed away. I'll give you an example of conventional wisdom. This sort of, Mrs. Einstein distributed that to me. There are 22 Arab states and only one Jewish state in the world. This sort of conventional wisdom has been used by defenders of Israel now for a good 50, 60 years. Let me tell you something, it doesn't work anymore. You know what the same thing would work? If you said the Japanese are a people and they have a state, the Germans are a people, at one time they had 2 states, the Indians are a people with 24 languages, they have a state, the Arabs are a people and they have 22 states. Why can't they have 1 state? Could you ask that question? Because these questions have been put and they've been answered. And the people are putting them aside. Print a card that says, why do Brazilians with 230 million people have 1 country, and Indians with 1,000 million have 1 country, and Indonesians with 300 million have 1 country, and Americans with 300 million have 1 country, but Arabs with 300 million have 22 countries? That is how you fight this game that is anti-Israel. You take it to their level. You are doing this as if you were convincing European parliamentarians. You are convincing a different set of people living in your midst, including Muslim Americans who you have to convince about the legitimacy of your argument, that you are a people. It is not Judaism that is under threat. It is the Jewish people who are under threat, whether they are Jewish atheists, they are Jewish Marxists, agnostics, or even the Jews who have converted to Islam. I met a few in Israel. They're still Jews. I'm a Punjabi, I could be a Sikh, a Hindu, a Christian, or a Muslim. But it's I'm part of the Punjabi people. We are the ones who stopped Alexander in his tracks when he came to India. Our elephants were very good. But then somebody cut us into 2 parts and slaughtered 1 million of us just 2 years after the Holocaust, but that's another story to tell. Oh, Mrs. Einstein, your son was my good friend.
Well, you don't need my stamp of approval, but you are brilliant, courageous, absolutely wonderful.
Oh, thank you so much. You're very kind.
But I'd like to ask you
Yes.
a
Oh,
question.
God. I knew that one.
You are Islamic.
Yes, I am.
How do you correlate, and you and someone like Dr. Judy Jasser,
Yes.
that you are Muslim with what the Quran says?
Yes. How do I correlate? My mother's a Muslim, my father's a Muslim, everyone who influenced me is a Muslim. The nurse that brought me to life is a Muslim. The father that created me is a Muslim. I have never had a problem being a Muslim, ever. Because I study it with a sense of detachment that is absolutely essential when you study something. You cannot study scholarly stuff by immersing yourself as a writer or a subject. You say, this is the Quran, that is me. There is not a single reference, as I said, when the Quran says that the Jews are untrustworthy. Show me that line. It doesn't exist. It has been put there hundreds of years ago and in parenthesis. Right, my Muslim friend? So in Surah Fatiha, there is no reference to Jews or Christians.
Yeah, he's right to the extent where, if the Arabic is translated into English, a lot of these things, a lot of these things are put into parentheses. So, it depends on the translator, what he's trying to say.
The point of view of the translator.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, not even translated, it's just plagiarization, lies being inserted into it. Let me give you one fundamental root, which I completely forgot in my speech. What is at the root of Muslim anti-Semitism? It is a story that is so disturbing, which the Jews actually don't even know about it because I've studied all your texts and there's no reference to it, that Muhammad himself slaughtered 900 Jews. Okay, there's no Jewish text to it. There's none. Okay, so here's how it happens. 200 years after Muhammad has passed away, now we got a whole lot of problem. All the caliphs have, the top advisors are Jews, which you did. The number one post with the caliph used to be a rabbi. This is right through the caliphates. And obviously, when you have unrepresentative government, you have serious problems. What did the clerics do? The story that Muhammad killed 900 Jews is exactly the same as the story of Masada. I have gone to Mecca, Medina, and stayed there to study this. 900 Jews in a death grave, and not a single body ever has come out in 1,400 years. I've studied every Jewish text written about the tribulations of the Jewish people. And mind you, one thing you can never accuse the Jews of is that they had a tragedy and they just forgot to write it down. You have a traffic accident in Tel Aviv and it is recorded down deep to the minute from the police station right down to this, and then you figure out which was the PFLP involved. No, just a damn traffic accident. No terrorism. No, I'm exaggerating to effect. But the only mention of Jewish, anti-Jewish activity in Medina is from the 11th century, when two Jews were accused of digging the grave of Prophet Muhammad to extract certain jewels that were said to have been hidden over there. And Maimonides mentions this in the trials of the Jews of Yemen as well. There is not a single reference, and let me quote you, and I'm sure everyone wants to go home, but I need to read from great 6 volumes of Jewish history, which, by the way, decorated every Jewish home in the 19th and 20th century. This is what greats had to do. I'm talking about, the book is called The History of the Jews. It's 6-volume 19th century publication. By the way, I have a copy, so nobody dare say it was not there. He says the first Mohammedans, and he writes Mohammedans as Mohammedans, treated the Jews as their equals. They respected them as friends and allies and took an interest in them even as enemies. The Asiatic and Egyptian Jews consequently treated Mohammedans as their liberators from the yoke of Christians. The Jews felt themselves freer under the new rule of Islam than they did in the Christian lands. The religion, that is Islam, has exercised a wonderful influence on the course of Jewish history and the evolution of Judaism. Now, this is written long before even the whole Zionist idea came along, and is written in the context.
What year is that supposed to be referring to?
18th century.
No, I know when Gretz wrote it. When is he referring?
He's referring to early Islam, the Abbasites, caliphates.
All right.
No, go ahead. I'm interested.
I'm not an expert on that, but I think there are other people that would disagree with Gretz.
Perhaps you may want to point out what you've heard.
See, I'm not an expert, so I really shouldn't.
No, that's okay. None of us are experts in anything. That's the academic problem. But feel free. Think of it as a street demo.
Aren't there aren't there recordings of Muhammad turning on some Jewish tribes?
That's exactly what I'm talking about.
But that was Muhammad himself.
No, it's not.
Are you talking about that?
You're saying that was made up, the things that.
Here's what it is. Okay, let me give you another example.
That's news to me.
If pedophiles want to have a license to have child sex, how wonderful it would be if God told them that that's a good thing. What do you have to do? You don't have to go to Congress committee to submit for a discussion of a bill. No. You just call your resident cleric and say, can you arrange for Muhammad's wife to be six years old? He says, absolutely. And push it to 9, no problem. So Aisha becomes a 6-year-old bride. Where's the evidence to that? None whatsoever. When Muhammad, the first caliph's daughter, when he converted to Islam, we know the year, and Aisha was there. She couldn't have been less than 14. Yes, the impossibility because she was one of the converts. But if you're the caliph and you're sick of mind coming from inbred families and have a taste for hundreds of kids and 200 wives, what do? You sanction the guy with the funniest uniform to say, bless me. And he says, pow, and thou art blessed. And now you have a scripture written 800 years after Muhammad died that his wife was 6 years old. And a whole lot of millions of kids get raped and pedophile because one guy, and why is it that when I write that Muhammad didn't kill the Jews, it is the Muslims who are upset. I'm serious. It's not the Jews who said, how dare you say that? No, the Jews started, the scholars, Professor Shlomo Avnevi, the Marxist, and he said that's what was interesting is that it was Arab students in his, who came to him and said that this is very bad. Muhammad did kill the Jews. Because the Sharia text said Muhammad killed the Jews, killing the Jews becomes a sunnah. Do you understand what it means to take away from the mullahs the very idea that Muhammad killed the Jews? But look at the paradox. It's the Jews who want to believe that Muhammad killed the Jews and the Muslims as well, because both are being served. The hate continues. You can always tell them Muslims plenty bad. And the mullahs are so happy that if Muhammad did it, why shouldn't we?
So we have time for about 2 more
Oh my
questions.
God, sorry. Okay, go ahead.
This might be a little bit facetious, but I'm wondering, when you point out, and I also know about that journalist who was denied entry and Kerry did not.
Yes.
He waved the finger, but did not do anything. How to confront the power of Saudi Arabia. Maybe the man upstairs has sent global warming to that purpose.
If you sign the Keystone Pipeline, then the man upstairs can't do a damn thing about it. But the oil companies are so tied up with the Saudis. How could the left and the right both be in the pocket of the Saudis? You've got to ask this question, how is Grover Norquist tied to the Saudis? Please! He's the king, emperor of the ultra-conservative right, the most right-wing of the right-wing people. And the most left-wing of the left-wing people are also pro-Saudi. Now, I don't know if it's a conspiracy. This is what I'm talking. If John Kerry can't speak to the harshly to the Saudis, and Grover Norquist can't speak to them, then what is it? You know, I'm sorry, you didn't have a question, did you? Oh, what do we do with it?
I was saying
hydrogen cell cars.
The power of the Saudis could only be undermined when we realize that oil is poisoning the environment, and maybe there would be enough movement.
Then you have, the problem is, then you'll have the environmentalists.
That's the left.
Yeah, that's the left.
That's the left.
They love the seal hunt problems that you can't even visualize, the polar bear dying and all that. Earth Day, 1 hour. I'm all for that. I come from the left. But I'm telling you, life is better when the lights are on. In Pakistan, 80% do not have electricity. They have Earth Day all their lives, man. And they say it sucks. What they want is power. And what the left is saying is, let's cut it off for 1 hour. Come on. You want to cut it off? Come to Pakistan. I'll put you in a place where there's no electricity. And you can do your communist Bolivian dictatorship, anti-dictatorship fight right there with Che Guevara caps in their hands.
But you don't get my point.
I get your point.
Unless you can break that.
You can, but you won't. The hydrogen cell car technology, right now Toyota has a car on hydrogen cell technology that runs 500 miles without refueling, but you cannot produce it because you're too goddamn tied up with the Saudi investments in Citibank, in the major corporations, in Chrysler, in General Motors, everywhere Prince Talal can just buy you. He can buy Howard like that. How can you have Saudi appointed professors in every Islamic studies program of every major university of this country? Not a single one came from Indonesia. I mean, what is it about Saudi Arabia? How did a prince wearing a long frock come up and charm us?
It's all the Nobel winners.
I mean, I've lived there, for crying out loud. There are bright Saudis. There are Saudis who are in the Communist Party. There's a Saudi Communist Party I know, who brave people who are fighting this system. Prince Talal to be the hero? Money, lack of spine.
The person in the back.
Thank you. Thank you for your speech. I have 2 points to make. Don't you think that maybe the Pakistanis have the nuclear arms because of their conflict with India, and we saw what happened in Mumbai before they get to Israel, because it's a lot closer? And if anybody watched Vice, that is on HBO, you could see what actually happens in the Pakistani-Indian border.
I'm a Kashmiri, so that should give you a picture that both Pakistan and India, they fight.
Absolutely, I think that is the scariest place on earth.
But you don't need a 3,000 kilometer to hit India. It goes straight over into Malaysia.
Okay, and the other point is that lately, on the last 5 to 6 years, large deposits of natural gas were discovered all over the Mediterranean basin. And on the same time, America has enormous new resources of natural gas. So what do you think is going to happen to all this Saudi Arabian installation and, dominating the world with their beautiful fuel? Because eventually we don't need them. And then they are going to eat sand.
That's what I want.
No, I tell you what's going to happen in it's future, so I can't predict. But knowing
nobody can, but eventually this is going to be the end of them, because they are not diversified, they don't have natural resources, and all their kids are sent here to study.
Just a second.
I'm sorry.
You know something, that some of the most highly educated women in the world are the Saudi upper class? And the reason is they're sent here and they take social sciences. The problem with social sciences is that it's not as tough as physics, but it makes you a better human being. If you study anthropology and sociology and political science at Harvard or Yale, chances are after 5-6 years there is going to be an element of questioning nature. And I'll tell you why I found this very intriguing. My first book, Chasing a Mirage, was smuggled into Saudi Arabia by the daughter of King Abdullah, and with a present given to the editor of Arab News, who went to university with me, and she gave it to him as a gift, saying, this is an Egyptian who's written about this. And he was joking with me. He said, when he told her, no, it's a Pakistani, she had that look on her face. They write books? Because in her mind, all the Pakistanis were gardeners, the cab drivers of Jeddah. They couldn't accept it. But look at the women who are driving up and defying the law. They're Saudi women. They have husbands, fathers, parents who are encouraging her. There is hope everywhere. But the fight that these Saudis against autocracy is decimated when an American president goes and kisses his hand. That's what I'm saying. Don't despair the Muslims. The Muslims will fight your war and bring justice and peace. And it will come, actually, mind you, from India more than any other place. But you can't do that if America is giving $1.5 billion to Pakistan, who's then funding it into Afghanistan, who then kill American soldiers and the bodies come back. I'll give you one last instance of American mediocrity in warfare for you to go back home and think, well, who's running this country?
It's actually 5 to 10 minutes.
Okay. One aspect of the American army is a general who heads the casualty reduction center. I'm paraphrasing, I don't know the exact name. The job of that unit is to ensure tactical methods that reduce American wounded and dead. They assessed that almost 80 to 90% of American casualties in Afghanistan resulted from what is IEDs, homemade landmines, improvised explosive devices. They traced it back to 2 fertilizer factories in Pakistan that produced the material for that. They tried tracking him down where he was, the general who runs these 2 fertilizer factories, till Senator McCain found him to be living in the United States of America as an American citizen.
Wow.
Safely retired, First Amendment rights and everything.
Can I ask?
I think, no, her question.
So we're going to collect the 2 questions first.
The lady here,
One,
yes.
And then you'll be the last question. And
Yes.
Well, you mentioned earlier that there are 300 million people in 22 Arab countries. It just shows, as an Arab and Middle Eastern and
Yes.
Muslim, it just shows you how divided Arabs are, / Muslims, if you want to add that too. Racism, discrimination is ingrained in our culture, whether people admit it or not. Education might help, but going outside of your social frame, your family, your community, you can wake up and realize that things are way different than what you were taught in your household or whatever, or maybe even in school. Having lived in UAE, United Arab Emirates, Tunisia, I lived also in Qatar. My parents lived in Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. I can tell you that Gulf countries are way, way more close-minded than North Africa. But now, after we had a revolution in North Africa, Egypt, Tunisia, and we have the Muslim Brotherhood, which are funded mainly by Saudi Arabia, Qatar, some people say even the US. So things are changing and they're shifting towards these countries becoming even more close-minded. And I know my grandmother had Jewish neighbors. They were very, very good together. But things are changing in Tunisia, for example, now, to a point where people are even more anti-Semitic. So, like, things are getting worse. They're not getting better. And a lot of Middle Eastern countries, Arab countries, do not allow Israeli passport holders to enter, except Tunisia, I know for sure, maybe even Jordan, a couple of other Arab countries. But that might change with time. It will even get worse. And honestly, I don't really have a positive vision for the whole situation.
Never lose hope. But let me correct you on one thing. The reason there are so many countries, Arab countries, is not because the Arabs are divided. It's because the British and the French had geometry boxes through which they drew up borders. No other place other than the United States of America has straight line borders between states. And the maximum, there would have been 2 countries, Arabia and Bilad Sham. These were the 2 countries historically that would have been. Egypt, justifiably, obviously, is a country, and the Maghreb would have been another country. One cannot say there had to be one country. It's ridiculous. The Kabyle and the cultures of the West are far different in their approach and their history than from the Gulf Arab states. But you can't lose hope. Do you know that in President Sarkozy's government, there were 4 cabinet ministers who were Muslim, out of which 3 were North African immigrants, and one was from Senegal. The Minister of Sports, Rashida Hati was her name. She was the Minister of Law. Right now in Quebec, with the Parti Québécois, there are 6 North African Arab Muslim women running. There is tremendous energy to fight this within the Muslim community. The problem, I repeat again and again, is that those who are fighting this are just not ugly enough for the mainstream to get recognized as authentic. Last question to the...
I'm going to intervene just for 1 second.
Yes.
It would be wonderful if the two of you can speak, because somebody involved in the democratic process in North Africa speaking about the Americans supporting the Muslim Brotherhood. Our gentleman needs to hear from you. Yeah. You should talk.
Fair enough.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, yes.
This is in reference to what you were mentioning earlier, that Muslims in, in East are, deprived of access to, please excuse me for saying this, are refrained from access to alcohol and sex. Now, are we, in other words, trying to, and this is not really a question to you, but a lot of people
Yes.
would try and associate that, with, in other words, associate these two things, alcohol and sex, to other mainstream religions. Are we trying to say that, a religion like Judaism and Christianity, they are okay with
They don't...
youngsters to have access to sex and alcohol, while as Muslims not? Because as far as I know, Judaism and Christianity and other mainstream religions, none of them, is okay with it. So are we trying to sort of belittle those?
Yes. I'm trying to belittle anyone who considers consensual sex between adults as worthy of death. Number one, I make no apologies for anyone who believes that an act of consensual sex between 2 adults is worthy of death. Number 2, all of Islamic history from the earliest has sex written all over it, in deep detail in the texts of the Sharia and the Islamic history, from rape of prisoners of war to taking slaves as non-Muslims and raping them in public before handing them over to the state. You and I are aware of that. Now, it is the hypocrisy of saying it is okay to rape a non-Muslim prisoner of war, but to tell your daughter that if you marry an African Muslim, I'll beat the crap out of you. Let me complete. No Muslim, irrespective, it's not a question of religion here. It is not a question of religion. Western society has evolved to a level where falling in love for a woman is a basic fundamental human right, because she's not a possession of her brother and her father. Whereas Muslim societies have not yet recovered from the notion that a woman is the possession of the father, the brother, and a husband. The father, yeah. And therefore, the notion of a Muslim woman falling in love and making the decision, should she wants to go out with a man, whether she has sex with him or not, is none of anyone's damn business. However, one second, the people who believe and invoke our Christians are against, Jews against, are part of that interfaith industry that are wreaking havoc on the real debate, that controlling women's sexuality and obsession with their virginity is leading to the murder of young women. And for Muslims not to be upset that their daughters are being killed or being raped is shocking. That I should be concerned that the right of your daughter to fall in love is absolutely sacred as a human being. And for anyone to invoke any religious text to say, you should not fall in love, and you don't fall in love with Casper the ghost. You can only fall in love when you meet someone. And how you stop Muslim women from meeting is that you deny them the idea of ever leaving home to meet with a man of her choice.
That's more of a cultural or regional issue. You know,
Brother, I am tired of justification. I know that in your Kashmir, women who do not cover their heads were thrown acid on their face.
no.
Your daftar is,
See, have you been there?
yes. You want to go to Srinagar with me?
Have you been to Kashmir?
Yes.
That's-
Do you know,
that's-
do you want me to show you pictures of death to Israel written all over the
Exactly,
place?
I agree with that, that has happened, but as far as throwing acid to young girls, that's never been a case because they did not wear hijab. Most of the girls there don't wear hijab.
So who got acid on their face?
I'll tell you, it has always been a case where the guy was not able to date that girl, so they, use this as a medium to take revenge. That's the reality behind that.
Brother, that should offend you more than the
It
fact
does
that
offend
somebody
me. That's
had
the reason why I asked
consensual
this question.
sex.
It-
This, get over with sex. It is not a
That's the
sin.
thing I have been
I'll tell
telling
you what.
Why are you associating it all the time? That's exactly what my question was.
Then we are on the same side. Let's
Get
go
over
out.
sex and alcohol.
Thank you very much.
On behalf of ISGAP, thank you very much for your talk and for coming here. And a quick reminder, on April